So we're live, and what we want to do is just go over some of the details of the first day of the Trump trial. Of course, Trump is facing off against Alvin Bragg in Manhattan. This is the first of four likely criminal trials that the former president will have to go through. Um, it's some
Yeah,
people say it's
I
not the
mean,
most
there's a
important, but
lot of action this morning. I think there's a lot of stuff that was taking place in the courtroom for those who are not familiar with like how a trial starts, and I think all of us are pretty much in that boat unless we're lawyers. Uh, we saw a lot of motions, a lot of discussion about what evidence will be able to be shown to the jurors, who would testify. We saw Judge Merchan actually say certain things couldn't be brought and shown to witnesses. Some things I thought, okay, that might actually be shown to George. I think that's something that would be helpful to be shown to George. Judge Markhan said, no, this is not necessary.
yeah, and I want to go over some of that stuff as well. What I want to do is kind of take questions from the audience as we go, comments. If you're on X, you can just click on the video and there's the comment section, and we will see those. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, you just comment in the comments area of those, and I'll try to bring up some comments as we go. But I also want to kind of take some of the breaking headlines, and as you can see here, I'm at CNN right now, and they're doing a pretty good job at covering this case live. Uh, and just go over as things happen over the course, at least the next hour or so. But yeah, Ed, what are your initial thoughts so far?
Well, so I thought it was interesting some of the things that the judge did and did not allow to be shown to the jurors. Of course, the jury has not been selected yet. That's a process that's going to take some time. But they did have these motions. They did have these discussions in court, and Trump was actually very, very involved. He was involved in the sidebars with the judge. Um, but I want to touch on a few of them. Let me find it here. So the prosecution will be allowed to use Karen McDougal's testimony. They'll be able to call her as a witness, question her. Of course, she's one of the women who claimed that she had an affair with former President Donald Trump before he was elected in 2016, I believe in 2006. And she said that she was paid hush money in order to not talk about it, just like Stormy Daniels did. So she's one of the witnesses. She's going to be able to be called. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that she should be a witness in this trial. She's one of the women who allegedly received the hush money payments. But the Access Hollywood tape that will not be allowed to be shown to the jurors. Of course, that's a tape that Trump said he likes to grab women without their permission, by their private parts. That will not be able to be shown. Testimony or evidence concerning the recent civil case in which Trump was held liable for sexual abuse, that will not be allowed either. So that will not be shown to the judge. I mean, to the jury. Um, there's a lot of things in there that I think could have went either way, and I think the stuff that I felt like was borderline. I think the judge actually ruled against. Um, there we will be able to hear about stories that the National Enquirer covered regarding Trump's opponents. Of course, the reasoning for that is that the National Enquirer had this catch and kill policy in which they would catch stories and then kill them for Trump. So I mean, I think that's big. I think that's something that we pretty much everybody expected would be allowed. Of course, the National Enquirer covered some really negative stories about Senator Ted Cruz in the primaries. We might all remember Ted Cruz being rather upset about how David Pecker put this story out there to help Trump. So that stuff will be allowed to be shown because you want to show that there was this attempt to prevent certain stories and get certain stories out to the public, because the prosecution wants to show the jury that not only did Trump falsify business records, he did so in order to sort of prevent the public from getting information about his alleged affairs.
Yeah, and I'll play that Ted Cruz clip that you posted, which is what it's a commercial or it's where Ted Cruz is basically saying that David Pecker is supporting Trump, is endorsing Trump, and what he's doing. So I'll play this really quick, and then I want to just kind of give some of my thoughts before we get to some of the breaking news here.
And the venue for this attack is not surprising, the National Enquirer. The CEO of the National Enquirer is an individual named David Pecker. Well, David is good friends with Donald Trump. They have a friendship that goes back for many years. In fact, the National Enquirer has endorsed Donald Trump, has said he must be present when he's losing, when he's scared, when Republicans are uniting against him. Decides to peddle sleaze and slime. You know, Donald is fond of giving people nicknames. With this pattern, he should not be surprised to see people calling him Sleazy Donald. And the venue for this attack is not surprising, the National Enquirer. The CEO.
Yeah, that started replaying there. So I think one important thing is that people don't realize is that this really could have impacted the 2016 election. People don't realize how close to the election all of this took place. The payments, the contract or the NDA signed with Stormy Daniels actually took place on October 27th. This was literally the day that James Comey came out and announced that they're looking into Hillary Clinton. So it was like 8 or 9 days before the actual election. So imagine if this came out, Stormy Daniels came out and said she's feared for her life, and which she said she did. She feared for her life and her child's life. So she decided she was going to come out with this information so that people would know that if something bad happened to her, that this actually took place. And imagine, say, 8, 9 days before the election, she comes out and says, I had an affair with President Trump weeks before Barron was born, or I think it was weeks before. Was it weeks before or weeks after? I don't know. Would that have siphoned enough votes off to Hillary Clinton from Donald Trump?
You mentioned that. So one of the things the judge said that won't be allowed to be presented to the jury is the fact that the affair with Karen McDougal continued after Melania Trump became pregnant. That, I guess, is irrelevant to the case, which I sort of agree with. I do want to touch on something that Tom said, Tom Finnell, in the comment section. He said he didn't say that he grabbed women by their private parts. He said he kissed them without their permission. Actually, the quote that he said, if you watch Access Hollywood tape, is, when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the P word. You can do anything.
Yeah, and didn't Stormy Daniels have to pay for Trump's legal fees after a failed lawsuit? Yes, this was unrelated to this actual case, though. I believe it was a defamation suit or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, the Access Hollywood tape, I can see why the judge would say, no, this can't be presented to the jury. It goes more to show that Trump is a womanizer, I guess, that comment. And he's not necessarily on trial for being a womanizer, right? He's on trial for falsifying business records in order to circumvent campaign finance laws. That's what he's alleged to have done. And they're, of course, seeking the first-degree felony, which requires that there's another law that's broken in the falsification of the business records. Otherwise, it's a second-degree felony or a misdemeanor, I believe.
And let's just consider what's actually the crime that they're alleging here. It's not that he paid off Stormy Daniels. If he wanted to pay off Stormy Daniels in order to remain quiet about something, that's fine, right? Like, anybody has the right to come to an agreement with a private party and give them money to not say anything publicly. But the fact that they paid her off in order to prevent her from coming public days before the election shows that it's a campaign contribution, or at least it seems like it. Like, whoever paid her off, which was him, that would be him giving his campaign that much money.
Yes. So I mean, the burden for the prosecution is to show that Trump made these hush money payments in order to trick the public or prevent the public from knowing that he allegedly had these affairs. Now, if the defense can convince the jurors or kind of put some doubt in the jurors' minds that he actually was doing it to prevent Melania and Don Jr. and Ivanka and his family from knowing about it, and that's the only reason he did it, then Trump could actually get off on this because it wouldn't have been an issue with campaign finance. It would just be falsification of business records, which is illegal still, but he'd get off on the felony and it would just be a misdemeanor.
Yeah, and Tom said Michael Cohen paid her. Yeah, the money came. Michael Cohen's the one that actually sent the money. But either way, if Trump directed that, paid him back.
Well, and then Trump
that's
reimbursed Cohen for that money, calling it legal fees for the exact same amount plus a little bit more for Cohen's services, allegedly. Of course, we're going to see documentation. We're going to hear testimony from Michael Cohen. We're going to hear testimony from Karen McDougal. We're going to hear testimony from quite a few people. Hope Hicks is in there, Stormy Daniels, of course, Stephanie Clifford. We're also going to hear from former Trump advisor, what's her name? The blonde lady. Why can't I think of her name?
Jenna Ellis.
No. The one that was Kellyanne Conway. We're going to hear from Kellyanne Conway and David Pecker, the CEO of the National Enquirer, who should be testifying truthfully. So, Pecker says, yeah, we had this arrangement. Pecker says, yeah, the goal was to not allow any of these affairs to come out and go public because he didn't want the public knowing it because he thought it would hurt him in an election. Then you have the campaign finance violations. If Kellyanne Conway, who was working for Trump at the time, I believe she's working for him at the time, maybe not, maybe she was still, I don't think she was at the very instant that happened, but she might have some insight. She's, of course, Trump's former counselor when he was president, and she was a campaign aide who spoke with Michael Cohen before everything happened to Access Hollywood tape. So she has some insight there as well.
Yeah, so I did Tom saying if the campaign thing falls apart, there's no misdemeanor because the statute of limitations has expired. They are using the campaign thing to get around that. Well, I mean, so what we're gonna have a jury. The jury is selected partially by Trump's defense, partially by the prosecutions, and they're going to determine this. There needs to be a unanimous decision in order for Trump to be convicted on any of these 34 felonies that he's being charged with here. So if there's one single juror, and I mean, there's going to be several selected by Trump's defense, one that thinks that Trump is not guilty here, Trump will not be convicted. It'll be a mistrial, and everything that goes along with a mistrial would take place, another trial down the road. So I think that's important to remember when people start claiming that, oh, it's the jury's going to be rigged or whatever. It's not. That's not the way these things work, right? I think, like I was saying in the beginning, it's important to note that this is much more than just paying off hush money, right? Like some in the media want you to believe that there's more to it, and that I think is the biggest part of all this. Now, how long will the trial last? We don't know. I know that Trump's team has asked for the trial not to take place, I think, on May 7th, which would be about 22 days from now, because he has an engagement, something to do with his family. Trump wants to go to Barron's graduation, so he asked, I think, on April, someday next week, I think, or the week after, not to have trial that day. So it's likely it's going to last at least a couple of weeks. I don't think it will last more than 3 or 4 weeks at most. But it's going to be something that the media attention's on, and there's no doubt that this is going to have an impact on Trump either way, right? So if he is exonerated, I think that this would help him massively in the polls. If he's convicted, I think the opposite.
So I mean, Tom says that if it's not the felony, the statute of limitations wouldn't allow them to prosecute it. I'm not 100% sure there, because Trump was president and you couldn't indict a sitting president. So there might be an argument there for the extension of the statute of limitations. If you can't indict a sitting president why should the statute of limitations include the time that he was president when he couldn't be indicted? So I think that would be a legal question up for the judge to decide. Maybe even go to some of the higher courts. Of course, they're going for the first degree falsification of business records, which is the felony, in which which it is within the statute of limitations, as far as I know.
Yeah, I want to just get to some of the news that broke in the last 10 minutes. So the trial is expected to include a lot of objections and sidebars, sources tell CNN. That's very likely in such a historic trial. The hearing on the motion to sanction Trump for social media posts will be next week. Judge Macron said he will hold a hearing on the district attorney's motion to sanction Trump on his first social media post.
Those sanctions, I believe the DA is looking for $1,000 per social media post. I think there are only a few of them that he was referring to, and he's also trying to get those posts deleted off of social media.
Yes, that's correct. Jurors, their identities will be known to lawyers on both sides. The identities of jurors, as CNN says, will remain anonymous, but will be known to the attorneys on both sides. Obviously, I think that's necessary. I think from a legal standpoint, these people are actually deciding who the jurors are. And
it's going to be a very, very difficult time finding jurors, but the judge did say he's going to allow a lengthening of the questioning of the jurors. I believe it's normally a 15-minute or 10-minute, and he's making it longer so that the defense and the prosecution can both spend more time questioning these jurors. Of course, questioning the jurors is something that is very important. So the judge can throw out jurors. The prosecution has a certain amount of jurors they can throw out without any calls whatsoever. So does the defense. So, he could say, I just don't like that guy. I want him gone. They can do that. I think there's 10 or there's a certain number that they can do. But then in addition to that, if you have calls, like you could say, okay, this guy is a super MAGA supporter, gone to all Trump's rallies, or this guy, he has all these social media posts speaking poorly of Trump, calling him a criminal, stuff like that. That would just, they could have unlimited number of jurors that they can throw out with calls. And of course, there'll be more jurors that come in if one is thrown out. So it can be a very arduous process. Obviously, this is going to be because the prosecution wants to make sure they don't have somebody that's going to definitely vote against conviction just because they love Trump. And of course, the defense doesn't want jurors who are going to be extremely anti-Trump. Whether somebody voted for Trump or voted against Trump, that probably won't have much say in the matter, as long as the judge and both attorneys don't believe that there's a bias where they can't sit through a trial and tune that out and say, okay, regardless of who I voted for, I'm gonna make this decision based on innocence and guilt. And it is a hard process. The judge is going to ask these jurors if they think they can be unbiased, and the jurors are going to have to answer to the judge and let them know.
Yeah, and if nobody knows, like the jury selection process is so intriguing. Like there's literally classes in law school just about jury selection. And
so people have to realize, like people are like, oh, but it's going to be impossible to get all the jurors unbiased. It is not going to be impossible to do that. It's definitely possible to get them unbiased. But even if you let 4 of them slip through, 5 of them slip through, 6 of them slip through, you need every single one of those jurors, every single one of them, including ones that the prosecution probably wishes wasn't on the case. Every single one needs to all agree that Trump is guilty for him to be found guilty. Only one needs to believe that he's not guilty, or believe there's reasonable doubt to believe, or believe that there's reasonable doubt to think he might not be guilty for there to be a hung jury, or if all of them agree that he's not guilty, he'll be found innocent, found not guilty. So it's very hard for, people are talking about this bias. It's going to be impossible. It's much more difficult for the prosecution in this case to find a jury that they think will convict than for the defense to find a jury that they think will convict, or let Trump off, right? Because you only need that one juror to have a
Yeah,
hung
I
jury.
just saw some remarks from within the courtroom a couple minutes ago. So before bringing the first batch of prospective juries into the courtroom, Judge Merchan said he will allow them to address the bench and lawyers privately if they prefer not to answer certain questions publicly. Doing so would entail clearing the courtroom of other jurors and sending them to a separate room, Merchan said. He said, there's not a whole lot of privacy here. We want to know who we're getting on this jury. Anything we do discouraging jurors from being 100% open kind of cuts against that. So there's 97 prospective jurors in the first panel. And I'm guessing most of you listening have actually been a part of the jury selection process at some point, whether you made it all the way to a trial or not. I think many haven't. But they have like waves of people.
I have never actually had to show up for jury duty before in my entire life.
Wait, you haven't?
I've never had to show up.
You've never had jury duty?
I've gotten a thing in the mail, and you call the night before to see if you're one of the numbers that have to show up. And every time I haven't had to show up.
Oh,
Never
wow,
had.
wow.
Yeah.
So I've never made it onto a case, but I made it to almost making it on where I was getting questioned by the attorneys and prosecutors. But yeah, it's an arduous process. So 96 prospective juries are in the first panel. So they will weed these people down until they get the ones that they want. And I'm not sure in Manhattan how many jurors there are.
I believe it's 12. There's 12
12.
jurors.
So I mean, they can weed things down quite substantially, and it's a process that could take more than one day. We might not have a jury today. In many large trials, it can take more than one day.
Yeah, and
Usually,
the prosecution and defense also keep in mind, like, are we picking leaders or followers? Like, there's certain, you kind of want some leaders, some followers. It's a whole planning situation because you're going to want a fourth person, so somebody to kind of lead the rest of the jurors. And I mean, it's a situation that, it takes a lot of research. You're researching the jurors. You're asking them tough questions, trying to examine the questions. So, some of these lawyers might even have people in the courtroom that are really good at reading people, like reading people's poker faces. We don't know, but it's definitely a process that is taking extremely seriously.
yeah, it kind of if you haven't watched Lincoln Lawyer, you kind of get a feeling for how this process works. And I'm not saying it's exactly true to form what happened, but I think it is a pretty good kind of depiction of how the jury selection process works in big cases. So CNN's reporting that court officers say they will bring jurors out shortly. So these jurors, these 96 men and women, will be brought into the courtroom, and I guess the grilling can start. The questions can start, and like I mentioned earlier, they will allow the entire courtroom to be cleared if any jury wants to answer questions privately rather than among the other juries, because this is a very significant case. They don't want to hold back. They don't want to prevent jurors from feeling uncomfortable answering certain questions, and they might like maybe some of them are embarrassed about something that they wouldn't want to say among 100 and some other people in the room.
Yeah, I mean, like, you never know. I think that's a good move by the judge, making sure that nothing's held back out of embarrassment or out of fear or out of shame. I I think it's a good move because you want that jury to be as unbiased as possible, and I think they'll get one. I really think they'll get a good jury, and I think the outcome of this case, it could go either way, but I think the jury is going to hear the story and they're going to have to make up their mind. If there's reasonable doubt that there wasn't intent by Trump, that it wasn't, his intentions weren't to, I guess, prevent the public from knowing that he allegedly had these affairs, then he won't be found guilty. If they do believe that he had the intent, that he knew about the campaign finance violations, that he knew about the business falsification, then, I mean, the law is pretty clear. He broke the law. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and as you can see in the background here, this is basically a video, thanks to the Associated Press, outside the courthouse. And as you see, there's press, media, all
A
lined
little
up.
cut off there, Brian. Like we
Yeah,
only
yeah. So on the right-hand side, the media, you can see the media and everything. There's also a lot of protesters on both sides. I've seen people saying, with holding signs against Alvin Bragg. I've seen people holding signs against Donald Trump. It's just a assortment of people. And then on the left is just within the courthouse. As you enter the courthouse, you can't really see it because our here we go. That's what you would normally be seeing. So I want to get DS. DS said, I've been on 2 juries. The greatest deterrent to crime is a jury of your peers. And I agree. And not every single juror gets it right, but the overwhelming number of juries do get it right. So like when you're out there and you hear people saying, oh, Trump's going to be convicted because the jury's tainted or rigged and this is all baloney, it's not. Like the overwhelming average of court cases, the result is legitimate, right? You know, you don't get too many appeals that actually get overturned. So that's important. I know that Trump will be making all sorts of excuses if he's convicted. But like I was saying, if he's not convicted, that is a significant boost for him in 2024, in the 2024 election. If he's convicted, I think that's going to hurt him substantially. And
So
I,
CNN's reporting that George is going to be brought in shortly. There's, like you said, I think 97 or so jurors who will be in the courtroom for Judge Marcon to vet, and the lawyers on both sides to vet. CNN has some interesting questions that jurors could be asked about, and they include their news consumption. So, where do you get your news? Do you get it from CNN, Fox News, News Nation, Twitter or X, Facebook? Affiliates with groups like the Proud Boys, QAnon, and Antifa. Obviously, those would be biases. If somebody's part of Antifa, then I'm sure the defense is going to be like, we don't want this person on the jury. If somebody's part of the Proud Boys, I'm sure the prosecution is going to be like, definitely not on the jury. Whether they or anyone in their circle attended a Trump rally or anti-Trump event, for obvious reasons, you want to vet out the biases. If they've read any of Trump's own books, because they could be biased by Trump's stories that may or may not be true. If they have views on whether a former president can be charged in state court, that's an interesting one. If they have views on how Trump is being treated in this case. So maybe people are like, Trump's definitely a criminal. I know he's a criminal. He everything he does is a lie. That's obviously going to be a bias that's going to get them thrown off the jury. If people are like, you know, Trump's being treated horribly, this is a politically motivated investigation, obviously they're going to be thrown off the jury as well.
Yeah. So T wrote, he said, what do you two really think happened? Do you think the primary reason did it to sway the election or save himself from more damage to his ego? I think it was for the election. I mean,
So
I think he took enough hits to his ego. I think that the timing of all of this, signing this NDA literally a little bit over a week before the election, says a lot.
So I mean, the argument is, you know, I'm sure he doesn't want Melania knowing about this. She probably didn't know that he had affairs with women. Maybe she did. I don't know. But obviously he didn't want them knowing. But the question is, did he also not want the public to know because he's afraid it was harm the election? I think the evidence I've seen would definitely point in that direction. Of course, the defense has their argument to make as well that the general public hasn't seen or heard yet. There's probably going to be more evidence put forth by the prosecution that would kind of put Trump in this mindset of what he was thinking at that point in time. If we go back a couple decades, you'll remember John Edwards, the Democratic presidential candidate. He had a similar situation where he paid, I think it was $1 million to cover up an affair he had. He was put on trial for campaign finance violations. So it wasn't for falsifying business records, it was just for campaign finance violations. A lot of people say, oh, Trump, if the FEC should have done it, why is the state doing it? Well, they obviously could have if they could do it to John Edwards. But John Edwards, the jury in his case ended up being a hung jury. They couldn't all agree on his guilt. They couldn't all agree that he wasn't guilty. But that situation was a little different because his wife at the time had terminal cancer. She had cancer. I don't know if it was terminal. She had cancer really bad. And his argument was that he didn't want to upset her. He didn't want to, put her in a situation where she finds out that he was having an affair while she was ill.
I see that. I think the difference here will be that Trump could argue that, I didn't want Melania knowing that
Yeah.
that I was
He definitely
cheating.
could argue that.
But I believe there's communications among him and David Pecker saying things like, we got to stop this before the election, or stuff like that. So those
And
communications.
we're gonna get the mindset from Kellyanne Conway, from David Pecker, from Michael Cohen, from Hope Hicks, from other witnesses who probably had conversations about why they were doing this. And of course, you could say, Michael Cohen's a liar. He's a convict. Michael Cohen also went down for this, right? Didn't he get? Isn't that what his charges were surrounding? Yeah. But there's going to be documents. There's going to be other testimony, and it's going to be ultimately up to the jury to decide if what the reason was for Trump doing this.
Right. Yeah. Like Cohen's not going to be put on the stand, and that's going to be it. Here's the evidence. Michael Cohen says this. What he says is going to be backed up by documentation, emails, recordings, perhaps. So it's not like it's just his word. And then they have all these other people, David Pecker. They have Stormy Daniels, McDougal. It's more than just one person's testimony. So it's going to be hard to defend against. But we'll see. That doesn't mean he can't win. And Tom said, if the NDA is legal, why does it matter why he got one? Because it does matter why he got one if the reason he got one was in order to protect his campaign and in order to contribute to his campaign via stopping this negative publicity coming out by paying. Michael Cohen is, and we went over this, Michael Cohen is convicted perjurer. Yeah, but like I said, I believe that they will have other evidence that backs up what Michael Cohen says. So Michael Cohen's statements will just drive home what the other factual evidence shows, is my thoughts. If they're just putting Michael Cohen out there and not showing anything else, I agree with you that his testimony might not be the best, although perjury is a crime. It's a felony. So
so to answer Tom's question, I just want to read this. So in cases where an NDA is used to silence someone about issues that could affect an election, such as allegations of personal misconduct by a candidate, it may intersect with campaign finance laws. If money paid in exchange for the NDA is deemed to be an expenditure related to the campaign, it must be reported as such. Failure to properly report these payments can result in violations of campaign finance laws, which is a key aspect of the legal issues surrounding Trump's NDA with Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. So he filed it as legal expenses on Trump Organization records. If he knew about this, if he had the intent to do this, then that would be a campaign finance violation and the falsification of business records. So yeah, I mean, to some, you might say, who cares? It was an NDA. But at the same time, shouldn't the American public know about this if you're running to be president of the United States? Should NDAs really stop somebody from finding out about it? You might argue, that's your personal right.
Yeah, so before as we kind of have a lull here, waiting for the jury to be seated in the courthouse, I do want to play for you the comments that Trump made shortly before going into the courtroom this morning around 10 a.m.
This is an assault on America. Nothing like this has ever happened before. There's never been anything like it. Every legal scholar said this case is nonsense. It should never have been brought. It doesn't deserve anything like this. There is no case, and they've said it. People that don't necessarily follow or like Donald Trump said this is an outrage that this case was brought. This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And again, it's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America. And that's why I'm very proud to be here. This is an assault on our country. And it's a country that's failing. It's a country that's run by an incompetent man who's very much involved in this case. This is really an attack on a political opponent. That's all it is. So I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much.
I mean, yeah, a lot of legal scholars, particularly those on the right, have said that, it's a weak case, have said that it's not something that should be brought. But then there's, I'd say equally, maybe more, maybe slightly less legal scholars, probably mostly on the left, or somebody who's in the middle, who says that it's very much a crime, and he should be held to no standard that is higher than any other American. So, I mean, yeah, it's not like a crime it wouldn't be something like stealing classified documents and refusing to give them to the government, hiding them, claiming you don't have them when you know you have them. That's a different type of crime. And I'm not saying Trump did that. That's what's alleged. It's not the same type of crime as, trying to overturn an election by creating fake electors, having them vote just to kind of create this. So this is out of the Trump's 4 legal cases that he's on that he's criminally charged for. I would say this is the lesser of all the crimes. I would agree with that. But at the same time, it's still a crime, and it's hard to argue. And I'm saying it's still a crime what's alleged. Of course, we'll find out. But it's still a crime, and there's no reason why a presidential candidate should escape a possible conviction just because he's either running for president or is a former president.
Yeah, and I want to touch on his comments that I just played, where he said that Biden was somehow involved in all of this. There's absolutely no connection between a federal government, a federal official, the executive of the United States federal government, Joe Biden, and a state criminal case, right? Like, there's no connections, right? There's could Biden have called up and said, "Hey, Alvin Bragg, you got to prosecute Trump"? Yeah, I mean, he could have. There's no evidence of that. There's no evidence. Yeah, Donald Trump could have called up and said, "Hey, can you prosecute me?" Like, there's no evidence of that either. You're just like, people that say that are just throwing dust in the wind and hoping that it lands somewhere in somebody's head and it sparks some conspiracy theory. There's no evidence of any of that. And unless you have evidence of that, if you have evidence of that, let's see it. Let's see it if you think that. But Joe Biden has not been in communications with anybody about this trial that the public is anyhow aware of. Doing so would be just catastrophic for him. Like, there's no reason he would do that. The state of New York decided to pursue these charges. Alvin Bragg decided to pursue these charges. William said, when I walk into a courtroom, or he said, this is what Trump said, when I walk into the courtroom, I know I will have the love of 200 million Americans behind me. What a narcissist, delusional fool. Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that 200 million Americans aren't actually behind him in this. I think, how many votes did he get? What was it, like 60, 70 million?
Yeah, I mean, it's all a guess. And like I said earlier, this isn't like the world-ending crime, right? But if he broke the law, he should be held accountable. Like John Edwards. John Edwards was brought up on charges for a very similar thing. So Tom also said, is Alan Dershowitz a right-wing legal scholar? I would argue he's definitely a conservative legal scholar. I would argue the fact that he represented Trump, he was Trump's attorney during the impeachment, definitely makes you think, okay, well, this guy obviously has a bias in his decision. Whether you say he's a Republican or not, I don't know. I think he's kind of wavered in his positions over the years.
Yeah, Ruben said Trump lies about everything, including his personal wealth. Yes, that's true. Yeah, I mean, these remarks are just like, yeah, he's going to say whatever he wants. He can say whatever he wants. It's free speech. He knows he has a camera on him. It's free publicity for him. He can spread whatever lie he wants. He can use it for whatever purpose he wants. He must think, okay, well, I have all these cameras on me right now. Probably more people are watching this than watching the debate right now. So I might as well say something that I want to say. And that's what happens. So feel free to provide any additional comments, we'll get to them. There's an update.
How long do you think this trial is going to last? Like, what's the guesstimate on that?
So like I was saying earlier, that there have been requests by the defense to make sure there's no trial on a certain date, and I think it was May 7th because they have like a family something. They have an event that they have to go to. So that would be today's the 15th, so that's 22 days out. So I mean, I think like a good benchmark would be 2 to 3 weeks.
Really? So I just asked Grok this question, and Grok's answer is the Trump hush money trial is expected to last 6 to 8 weeks,
I can't see that. I mean, is
including
Grok right
jury
on this?
selection.
I don't know. I mean, how long before the opening arguments come up? Is that going to be next week?
Yeah,
Is it going to be?
I don't see where they can have enough evidence to drag it out that long, unless there's a lot that we're just not seeing. There's certain people that are going to testify. You can definitely have more than one person testify in a given day. So it definitely seems like a lengthy. Maybe Grok's wrong. Grok has gotten stuff wrong before. What does everybody else think who's listening?
Yeah, and I want to give a quick update from The Guardian. They said that court proceedings have paused for several minutes as prospective jurors are going through security prior to entering the courtroom. Judge Merchan has temporarily left the bench. Donald Trump remains at the defense table speaking with his attorney, Todd Blanche. In a brief,
Trump's very involved. He's been
he
very
is,
involved.
and it's interesting that he's there, and it's good. Imagine being a juror walking in and seeing Donald Trump sitting at a table across from you. I mean, it has to have some sort of impact, I assume, whether it's for or against the defense. I don't know. But it says in a brief exchange with Blanc, after the judge stepped away to his chambers, Trump threw aside his hands in exacerbation and appeared to point forcefully in the direction of the bench several times. Trump, continuing to gesture energetically to Blanc, briefly turned away and let out a sigh of clear frustration and shook his head. It's interesting. I wonder what that could be.
So Tom down there says the point is to keep Trump wasting time and money. Obviously those on the right are going to say that. Those on the left are going to say no. It's because he appears to have committed a crime. I think we just have to wait. If Trump's convicted, then I think it's going to be very hard to say, oh, this was all about trying to it was all politically motivated. If he's guilty of a crime, political motivation shouldn't even matter, right? Like if he's guilty, if he committed a crime, he's prosecuted for it and convicted for it, then it doesn't matter if there's political motivation, right? If he's found not guilty, though, then I think that would be a fair argument. Like if there's a lot of defense evidence that shows that, oh, this was he didn't actually commit the crime, I think it would be fair to say, yeah, maybe it was politically motivated, or maybe even likely was politically motivated, and unfairly so. If Bragg was a MAGA supporter, would he have been prosecuted? Would Trump have been prosecuted? No. But then you could say it was politically motivated too. I mean, everybody's going to have biases, right? If it's a Republican DA and he doesn't prosecute, are you going to say it was politically motivated that he didn't prosecute? You could argue that, but ultimately it should come down to what the courts decide, right?
Yeah, I agree. And Q Infinity said it's up to 8 weeks according to report. So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, 8 weeks.
So jury selection. So jury selection could take 2 weeks, and if that's the case, then that's a trial of 4 to 6 weeks instead of 6 to 8. And Tom said, did they offer him a deal? We don't know. I don't think. I think even if the prosecution offered Trump a deal, we don't necessarily need to know about
Trump
it.
wants you to know. Like we're not going to know unless Trump wants you to know. The prosecution likely wouldn't say that. I mean, I guess it's possible that there was a deal offered. I don't know what the deal would be. What would Bragg be like? Oh, probation if you admit guilt. I don't know. I mean, who knows, right? Tom said if Bragg was a legitimate DA, he would be prosecuting gun crimes instead. So I kind of feel this is like a straw man argument. Like one doesn't have to do with the other. If he's prosecuting Trump, and you think that maybe he's not prosecuting certain other crimes, which I agree. I think that New York's judicial system is very lax compared to some other areas, whether right or wrong, I don't know. I think there's arguments for both for why they do the things they do. But to compare gun crimes to this, like just because you didn't prosecute one gun crime doesn't mean that you shouldn't prosecute like stuff like this, right? Like a public figure abusing the system, like he allegedly has.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's too often we get straw man arguments like that where they want to say, oh, but he's not doing this, so how dare him prosecute Trump? I feel that's kind of a cop out saying, oh, I know Trump is likely guilty here. Why aren't they prosecuting other guilty people? Just let it play out. If you think that this is prosecutorial, what's the word?
Misconduct. Yeah,
Misconduct.
if it's
Then
prosecutorial
that's
misconduct,
great.
then he's obviously he'll be found not guilty, and then maybe then maybe we can look into some of this stuff. Like was it politically motivated? You know, like I said before, if politics played a small role in this, and he's guilty, it shouldn't matter. You know, DAs are political appointees, right? So, or political, they're elected, right? So, you know, I think you could go either way. Like, do you start saying Trump didn't get indicted in a certain jurisdiction because it was a Republican DA? I'm sure people could try and make that argument if you really wanted to.
So Tom said, how many resources is he spending on his trial to what end just to get a conviction? You seriously believe that? I don't think the amount of resources should have anything to do with it. Like if he's spending $10 or $10 million, like this is, you prosecute crimes regardless of the cost is my thoughts. I do want to get to Amy because this is actually a interesting thought here. Reminds me of the Hunter laptop storyline, suppression of info by people to influence elections. So I agree and disagree. So I do think the media hid information about Hunter Biden because really I think it was because they didn't know if it was true or not, and they didn't want to be accused of trying to manipulate the election. In turn, they ended up possibly manipulating the election by failing to publish stuff. But if there was a direct line where Joe Biden paid the media, say he gave CNN $130,000 in order to not publish information, then that would actually be a crime.
Yeah, that would be a campaign finance violation. And if he was doing business in the state of New York and claimed that that payment to CNN was legal fees, that would also be a crime of falsifying business records.
So I got a few tidbits of news from CNN. 6 minutes ago, 96 jurors are ready to be brought in. The judge says, Judge Mercado, there are 96 jurors ready to be brought into the courtroom. There are 200 jurors total in the courthouse, he noted. And then, so imagine if you were there for jury duty and you're not one of the 96. You had like a 50-50 chance of being selected to go into the court and possibly be a juror in the Trump trial. I wonder how.
And then you're sitting in there and you realize that, hey, if a lot of these jurors are thrown out for calls or not for calls, I have a chance of actually being in this election process.
Yeah, so 5 minutes ago from CNN, lawyers will be analyzing everything from potential jurors' clothes to the mannerisms, CNN analyst says. Lawyers on both sides will gain valuable information about potential jurors based on their answers to a list of questions, but that's not the only thing they will be assessing in the courtroom, as CNN legal analyst said. You're going to have the facts the juror discloses, but as a lawyer, a prosecutor, or a defense lawyer, you are analyzing and assessing everything about the juror. So that's interesting if you didn't know how it works. They definitely look at other things, like maybe you're wearing clothes that they feel a MAGA person will wear. Is that grounds to get
What
you
are
thrown
those?
out?
What are
Probably
those
not.
clothes? What clothes does
I
it
don't
wear?
know.
Somebody have a
MAGA
MAGA hat on, maybe?
Yeah.
So wouldn't that be funny? Like, I wonder if there's any jurors there wearing a MAGA hat.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a way to get out of jury duty, right?
Yeah, well, so So, I mean, this goes back to what I was saying before. It's kind of like playing poker, and the lawyers, the attorneys have to look at like when a question is asked, raise your hand if you believe that or did this. And like somebody's like, or somebody's like making a weird face. They can do that and analyze that and be like, okay, I think this person's kind of hiding something. And I'm sure they're going to do that.
Hey! I want to cut you off because if you look at the video, look who's there, Harry Sisson. If you don't know, he's like a guy that tweets a lot about pro-Democrat, pro-liberal
Oh,
viewpoints.
wow. There's Harry.
He's there talking to the media right now. It'll be interesting. I could actually turn it up. Let's see. See if I can hear. Nah, there's not going to be sound there. Another thing, 3 minutes ago, CNN reported that the first set of jurors consisting of the 96 New Yorkers from Manhattan are now entering the courtroom. They're seated. They have not been sworn in as of yet.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a big thing when you're sworn into a jury. You can't lie. You can't, you're not going to hide stuff. You have a legal obligation. You have an obligation, ethical obligation to tell the truth. And if the judge says, do you really believe that you can judge this without bias? You're going to answer. You're going to have to answer. That's a question you're going to have to answer the judge. And I don't think most people most people don't like jury duty. I'm sure it's probably a high profile case like this. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, wow, this is going to be awesome. I get to be on the first president ever, the first presidential trial of a former president. I get to be on the jury. I think there are going to be people who want to, be on the jury at all costs. But when you're asked by a judge, when you're asked by the lawyers, you have to answer honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I would find it fascinating being on the jury. I doubt that they would
You would
select me.
get kicked off. The defense would kick you off right away, Brian.
Gallo memes, these hacks have no grasp on issues at hand. I mean, if you disagree with us, feel free to post, and I'll be happy to debate what you're saying. But thanks for your great feedback. So this isn't a video space. This is actually just a live video. You can do video spaces, but it's a little trickier to have us both up there. So we prefer this. It's interesting because you can still take questions from the audience. I like it. Hopefully they draw more attention to these things, though. That would be nice. How many jurors can they challenge? So
Yeah,
I'm not exactly sure. Do you know?
So the defense can challenge, I think, 50 jurors before the preemptory challenge phase. So that's when they can excuse a juror without providing a justification. Then there's a certain amount for that, right? And then if you can provide a justification for why a juror shouldn't be on the case, then that's another one if the court agrees. So like I could say, that guy, he's wearing a green shirt. I think people with green shirts are anti-Trump. I don't want him on the jury. You have a certain number, and it's somewhere between 10 and 50. I think it's closer to 50. But then you have the unlimited number. If you can say, this guy went to a Trump rally and chanted F Biden, that would probably be cause to remove the juror for bias. Of course, the judge would have to agree. The court would have to agree. But there's an unlimited number of that, and then another juror would come and take his place, and questions would resume to that juror.
Yeah, so another update from CNN really fast. So the swearing in of these 96 jurors has just begun. The judge has introduced himself to the jury. He's informed them some of them will be selected, and he explained what the trial is and what his role will be and what their role will be. He thanked the jurors for participating in all of this, and he told them that the jury is the cornerstone of our judicial system. I definitely agree with that. It's a shame that some people decide to try and pretend that they aren't, or that our legal system is majorly flawed. It has its flaws every now and then, but ultimately, it's been working for hundreds of years.
It's funny. I'm just watching this video of Harry. He was arguing with a Trump supporter. It looked like uh,
Good old
looks like there's
Harry.
some arguing going on there.
It is funny that the AP is concentrated on Harry there. Uh, hopefully,
I
there's
guess
no
somebody
punches thrown.
identified him. Why
So
didn't we go? We should have went. Why didn't we go to Manhattan for this?
I don't
We
know.
could be live. We could be holding this video streaming live at the Manhattan courthouse. Maybe next
So
time.
Ruben said most jurors know all about Trump in New York City. He's grifting and lying since the 70s. And yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible to not know of Trump at this point. Everybody in the country knows of Trump. At least everybody that is mentally with it knows of Trump. So when you're selecting juries, usually you say, "Oh, do you know anything about this person?" And if you do, you're usually thrown out. Uh, I think you're going to have to ask them what their preconceived knowledge of this case is, which they probably will, and they're probably going to look for people that don't have any major public knowledge of this case in particular.
So there's a few more updates from CNN. Did you? I think you covered these though.
Yeah, I think I caught up to the updates from CNN. The Guardian's
So
putting a couple things here. Go ahead.
so
Are you going?
a lot of people. No, I actually just lost my train of thought. You go ahead.
Judge Merchan has rescheduled the hearing for whether Donald Trump will be held in contempt. And that has been changed from April 24th to April 23rd. So that will be next week, next Tuesday, I believe, at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. That's going to be an interesting hearing, I think. And just repeating what CNN reported, The Guardian said that the first batch of jurors have been sworn in now by Judge Merchan. This makes Donald Trump the first U.S. president ever, former or president, to stand a criminal trial. I mean, I don't think it can be understated how major this is, how big of a news event this is. It's kind of ironic that O.J. Simpson passed away last week. This is probably going to be up there with the O.J. Simpson trial in regards to how many people in America are tuning in.
I think
They're not going to watch it live, but
I think this is the least interesting of the trials, though, of the potential Trump trials. Whether we see other criminal trials of Trump, who knows? If he runs for election and wins, he can make a lot of those. He can make the federal trials go away. As far as a Georgia trial, never know, that could go away that can go away as well. This one is just doesn't have the excitement, I guess. And by excitement, I mean there's not really that much to it. There's not that much evidence that I think people really haven't seen yet.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think that there's, like you said, I think that most of the evidence in this trial is pretty public at this point, whereas like the documents case, I think there's going to be a lot of tidbits that the public has yet to actually know about, just because of how guarded some of the material is because of the classifications, and some of it will remain guarded, I think. But yeah, this is definitely still, though, I would argue, will rival the interest that the O.J. Simpson trial had.
Yeah. So hey, Brian, I got to run for about 10 minutes or so. If you want to keep going, you can keep going. Otherwise, you can shut it down. I'll be back in 10 minutes if you keep it going.
We'll shut it down. I think that there's probably not going to be a whole lot of news for the rest of the day. It's just going to be just jury selection, right? So they're going to be asking questions of the jury, probably a lot of questions that were already asked, but also some other things. But I think this is a good place to leave off. We'll probably do something similar to this as the trial goes on. I think it's important to keep people up to date.